Welcome to Great Online Training's demo on pharmacovigilance. From this video, you will be able to understand basic concepts of pharmacovigilance, which will be helpful for freshers or anyone who is looking for their career in pharmacovigilance. For better learning, do not skip any part of the video and continue watching it until the end. Before I start with session, let me introduce myself. My name is Ramya and I am working as a pharmacovigilance trainer and I have 10 years of experience in pharmacovigilance. My experience includes case processing, quality review, subject matter expert, operational manager and pharmacovigilance trainer. And I am a certified Medra coder. And I have worked with different clients and have hands-on experience in Argus safety database. We at Great Online Trainings are offering instructor-led course in pharmacovigilance, which is designed to provide comprehensive understanding and overview of all key aspects of pharmacovigilance. In our course, we include case studies of the adverse events to illustrate the decision-making process and reasoning needed behind when and how to properly report incidents to the regulatory authorities. Our course duration is 40 days. In that last 10 days are only for practical examples and exercises along with access to the training database. Once you enroll into our courses, we will provide a guide on the pharmacovigilance process, which include all the important guidelines from the key organizations. And we also provide recordings of the sessions on daily basis. We have both weekdays and the weekend batches. So depending on based on your availability, you can enroll into any of these batches. Once you enroll into our courses, you will have access to our pharmacovigilance training for 1 year, where you can join any sessions in that 1 year. For any further details on this training, please contact the numbers that are displayed on the screen. To enroll into our course, please visit our website greatonlinetraining.com, where you can register with your name, email ID and the phone number. And it is completely free, and you can also attend our free demo class and you can decide after the demo class whether you want to continue with our training or not. Let us start with the session. So by the end of the session, you are going to understand the basic concepts of pharmacovigilance and pharmacovigilance in drug development and pharmacovigilance in post-marketed products, history and evolution of pharmacovigilance, overview of pharmacovigilance and ICSR processing, aggregate reporting phase of pharmacovigilance and the signal management, medicine safety plans, and pharmacovigilance audits and inspections. We will start with the introduction to the pharmacovigilance. So as per WHO, the World Health Organization, pharmacovigilance is defined as the science and activities relating to the detection, assessment, understanding, and prevention of adverse effects or any other drug-related problems. So from the definition, we can understand like there are 4 phases in pharmacovigilance process, which are the detection of adverse events and then assessment of adverse events, like for the seriousness or maybe for the labeling or for the causality assessment. And we will understand like why this event is happening, and the prevention of adverse events like updating the labeling documents or maybe conducting the studies. So this is the pharmacovigilance process. But why these adverse reactions occur? Because the effect of any medicine cannot be predicted with absolute certainty, and there is some risk involved with each and every medicine. So that is why we need pharmacovigilance process needed to quantify the risk that is associated with the medicinal products. So let us see what are the products that are covered by the pharmacovigilance. So pharmacovigilance covers the medicines, like we have pharmacovigilance process is required for all the medicines from the pre-marketing phase till throughout the life cycle of that product, and for herbal, traditional and supplement medications. Regulatory authorities does not have authority over these dietary products or the herbal products or the supplements when they are marketing like prescription medication. So these products they might contain ingredients which can cause harm to the patients. If any event happen because of these products, we have to report them to the regulatory authorities so that the regulatory authorities will take further action on those safety of these products. And the biologic products. So the pharmacovigilance covers the safety of the biologic products like allergenic somatic cells or gene therapy tissues or any recombinant therapeutic proteins. And pharmacovigilance is needed for all the biologic products from the pre-marketing throughout the life of the product. And the guidelines for handling these biologic products is more or less similar to the medicinal products. And it is same for the blade products as well. So the pharmacovigilance is needed for the blade products from the pre-marketing till the end of that product, and the guidelines are also more or less similar as for the medicinal products. And the vaccine vigilance. So in vaccine vigilance there are specific requirements apart from the regular processing of the cases, like we have specific causality assessment requirement, or maybe which events needs to be considered, like there are characteristics of adverse event following immunization, so we need to consider a few criteria to select the events in the vaccine. And the pharmacovigilance is needed for the vaccines throughout their life cycle from the pre-marketing. And the medical devices also need pharmacovigilance, so which we call it as materiovigilance. The regulatory authorities has country-specific reporting requirements for these medical devices. And for the cosmetics, so like herbal products, regulatory authorities does not have any control over the marketing of these cosmetic products. So that is why pharmacovigilance is needed for the cosmetic products, because they also include chemicals which are used in the humans. So if any adverse event happened after using the cosmetic products, it has to be reported to the regulatory authority, and this reporting happens through the cosmetovigilance process. And the next one is veterinary products pharmacovigilance, which we call it as veterinary pharmacovigilance, which concerns monitoring, evaluating, and improving the safety of veterinary medicines, with particular reference to the adverse events in animals and human beings related to the use of these medications. The European Medicine Agency has detailed guidelines on handling these veterinary products, which we will address in our in our pharmacovigilance training. And we also have tobacco vigilance, so that all the tobacco products are also covered in the pharmacovigilance. So any adverse event happen after taking any nicotine or any other tobacco products, that information we need to report it to the regulatory authorities. And all the events regarding these products are covered under tobacco vigilance. So these are the different products that are covered by the pharmacovigilance. For better assessment of the safety, these products were categorized based on their use. And the guidelines and submission requirements may vary for each of these products. So in our pharmacovigilance training, we provide detailed guidelines on handling reports from these products. Aims of pharmacovigilance. What are the major aims of pharmacovigilance? First one is early detection of unknown safety problems and detection of increase in frequency of known problems. So majorly pharmacovigilance is for the patient is majorly pharmacovigilance concerns safety issues of the product. So if any adverse event happen, that we can detect early from the pharmacovigilance process. And to improve patient care and safety in relation to the use of medicine and all medical and paramedical interventions. And to promote understanding, education, clinical training in pharmacovigilance and its effective communication to health professionals and to the public. And also to identify the risk factor and quantify them. These are the major aims of the pharmacovigilance. Scope of pharmacovigilance. The scope of pharmacovigilance has grown remarkably in recent times and is now considered to include the following domains. We not only collect adverse drug reactions or the events regarding the products, we also collect medication errors like drug dispensing errors or any prescribing errors or any administration errors, off-label uses. So any error related to the medication use, that events also we consider for reporting purposes. Or any counterfeit or substandard medications. So counterfeit are any dummy medications or a medications which are not tested through the QC processes. So these medication, if anyone identify there are some counterfeit medication, that information also we need to report it to the regulatory authorities. And lack of efficacy of medicines. If the drug is not working, that information also is collected in the pharmacovigilance process. Any drug misuse, abuse of the medicine, and also interaction between the medicines and also drug and food interaction information is also collected in the pharmacovigilance. What are the key organizations that play a major collaborative role for the pharmacovigilance on a global level? We have some few key organizations like the WHO and the ICH, the International Conference for Harmonization, and the Council for International Organization of Medicinal Sciences, the CIOMS. So these three are the major organizations. Globally, they provide a guidelines to all the pharma companies to follow, like on how to handle the patient reports and when to submit and how to submit the reports to the regulatory authorities. And then there are country level regulatory agencies like US FDA, UK MHRA, and for Japan PMDA, and Health Canada for Canada, and Australian Therapeutic Good Administration TGA, and China FDA, and European Medicine Agency for European Union region, and the CDSCO, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization for India. Like this, each and every country has their own regulatory authority, and these regulators are responsible to ensure safety, quality, and efficacy of medicines in their country or region, providing regulatory guidelines or legislation, and conducting inspection of the pharmaceutical companies. So, whatever the guidelines we have to process the pharmacovigilance cases or any patient reports, all these guidelines we have received majorly from the ICH, CIOMS, and the country level regulatory agencies. Coming to the pharmacovigilance history, on like we will see how the pharmacovigilance has evolved over the time. So pharmacovigilance has been there like for almost hundreds of the year, but the current pharmacovigilance guidelines, if we say it has evaluated from the 1960s, so we will see like how the pharmacovigilance process has evolved over the time. So in 1902, the FDA has started Biologics Control Act, which was followed by death of children from the contaminated vaccine. And then later in 1906, because of this, they have initiated the Pure Food and Drug Act for the any food supplements and also for the medicines. And then in 1938, FDA has initiated Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act after the incident with sulfanilamide elixir. So this sulfanilamide elixir, because after using this elixir, almost 107 deaths happened in USA because of the solvent that is involved in this elixir, which is diethyl glycol, which was considered as cause of death. And so many companies are not aware of the toxicity of this diethyl glycol, and consequently, this FDAC Act was initiated to conduct the safety of the drugs before they release into the market. And then later, the CIOMS the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences was initiated in 1949, and in early of 1950s, there was a series of cases of aplastic anemia which was associated with chloramphenicol after approval was identified, which demonstrated the necessity for surveillance of the drugs after their approval. So the post-approval surveillance was initiated in 1950s, but later it came into effect majorly after this thalidomide tragedy, which we consider as major public health disaster, where this drug of thalidomide was released as a completely safe product by the developers, but after and it was used to all the populations like elderly or the children's, even to the pregnant ladies. Now we will see what is this thalidomide tragedy. So it was first entered into the German market in 1957 as an over-the-counter remedy based on the maker's safety claims. Later, and they have advertised this product as completely safe for everyone, including mother, child, even during the pregnancy, as the developers could not find a dose high enough to kill a rat. And then by 1960, this was marketed in almost 46 countries. Around this time, an Australian physician discovered like that this drug also elevate morning sickness, and he started recommending this off-label use of the drug to his pregnant patient, setting a worldwide trend. Later, many children in the 1960s were born with the condition called phocomelia as a side effect of the drug thalidomide, resulting in the shortening or absence of the limbs, as you can see on the image. Almost 6,000 to 8,000 babies were affected with the limb malformations. And the birth of modern spontaneous reporting of adverse drug reactions started after this thalidomide tragedy. And that is when all the regulatory agencies considered, along with the efficacy, safety also, the safety of the medicine was also emphasized and standards were set. And these are the news from that time where the thalidomide incident happened, where multiple patients were, multiple consumers have started reporting on the on this phocomelia condition, and the drug makers have apologized. But still, the condition was worse. Almost 6,000 to the 8,000 babies were affected with this condition called phocomelia. Coming back to the history, after this thalidomide tragedy, the USA has started their adverse drug reaction monitoring of the post-marketed products, and also UK has initiated yellow card scheme, and also some other countries like Australia, Canada, and Ireland, Netherlands. They all set up the procedures for a systematic evaluation and collection of the adverse drug reaction. And then in 1968, the WHO program for international drug monitoring was initiated, where 10 countries have agreed to all the reports from the national centers to submit to the WHO drug monitoring project. And the PMS monitoring of the side effects and the suspected adverse effects of the drug, and observing and recording of the drug usage and effect, all this was started in this from 1968. And then in 1990, SIOMS has published their first guidelines on international reporting of adverse drug reactions. Like what are the processes that the companies have to consider for reporting the adverse drug reactions to the regulatory authorities. And then in 1992, the International Society of Pharmacovigilance was started, which majorly provide the guidelines on the pharmacovigilance processes. And then in 1995, the European Medicine Agency was founded to harmonize the processes and the regulations in entire European region. And then the EMA has initiated Vigilance, the clinical trial guidelines in 2001, and also FDA has initiated their post-marketing safety reporting guidelines. And in 2005, the risk management guidelines was initiated. The current the safety of the medicine plans or the medicine safety plans are initiated from these risk management guidelines. And then in 2007, FDA Amendment Act on the new IND rules, like for the clinical trial, what are the requirements for the submission to the regulatory authority? So the requirements were provided initially in 2007. And then in 2009, MHRA has initiated Black Triangle scheme where they have included the certain products where inform all the suspected adverse drug reactions for the black triangle products has to be submitted to the MHRA, which was initiated in 2009. And then in 2012, the EMA has provided the good pharmacovigilance practices, which was replaced by the Volume 9A guidelines. And then in 2014, the new clinical trial regulations were initiated, and in 2017, the new hydra vigilance guidelines were provided by the European medicine agencies. So this is how the current guidelines on the pharmacovigilance has evolved evolved over the time. But are the drugs are safer today? So we have seen like so many regulations are there to consider to make the to ensure like whatever the medication that the patients are taking are safe enough. If we see the reports from if we see the results from few articles published on the safety of current medications, like it has been suggested that ADRs may cause 5,700 deaths per year in UK as per the article published. And as per the article published in JAMA, in USA, almost 6.7% of serious adverse drug reactions are causing hospitalization, with the overall incident rate of 0.32% fatal adverse drug reactions. That means almost 1 lakh patients are dying because of the adverse drug reaction. And almost 4.2 to 6% of the adverse drug reactions are causing hospitalization, with a median of 5.8% cases of adverse drug reactions are happening in the US. In addition to the suffering of the patients, the treatment of adverse drug reactions impose a high financial burden on healthcare. Like some countries are spending almost 15 to 20% of their hospital budget dealing with the drug complications, as per the article published in the Pharmacoepidemiological and Drug Safety. And during the 1960 to the 2013, there were almost 462 safety-related withdrawals happened worldwide. And in that, market life is less than 2 years for 31% of the products, and market life is less than 5 years for 50% of the products. So that is the safety of the medicines as per the information published in the articles. So as we can see, all the medicines are not safe, so there is some risk associated with it. And if we see the recent recalls that happened in the last year, in 2020, the FDA has withdrawn drug called Belvic, which was used for the weight loss because of potential risk of cancer, which is outweighing the benefit. Later, it was discontinued from other markets as well. And EMA has suspended the drug called Picato with the generic of ingenol mebutate, which was a gel used for treating the skin condition actinic keratosis. And later, they have identified uh, the adverse reactions of skin cancer with this product. So they have suspended this medication from their market. Later, it was discontinued from the other countries like Canada and other markets as well. So these are the recent recalls we have because of the safety concerns. The next topic is pharmacovigilance in pre-marketed products. To understand how pharmacovigilance works in pre-marketed products, we need to be aware of what are the drug discovery and development phases. So in drug discovery is all about discovering the new medication. Before, in earlier days, the drugs were mostly found by identifying active ingredients from traditional medicines or maybe purely by the chance. Later, classical pharmacology methods were used to investigate chemical libraries, including small molecules, natural products, or plant extracts, and find those with the therapeutic effects. And in drug discovery phase, we have different steps in drug discovery phase. The first one is the basic research on the disease. In this phase, the researchers will perform basic research on the disease and they will identify the target. So in the target identification is where the researchers find a gene or protein that plays a significant role in the disease, and they will understand the molecular mechanism of the disease and identify a therapeutic target in that pathway. So a target can be a gene, key enzyme, receptor, ion channel, or nuclear receptor. So in simple, a- target is a pathway in that particular disease where the pharmaceutical ingredient will go and work or act on that. Once the target is identified, they are validated through different mechanisms using genetics, animal models, antibodies, RNA studies, signaling pathway analysis, and other functional analysis of the genes. And following target validation, the compound screening assays are developed, that is, identifying lead compound. The lead compounds are active pharmaceutical ingredients in a drug candidate that produce effects. And how the researchers will identify the leads? So they will identify by screening collection of different compounds from the compound library, or maybe compounds from the published literatures, or maybe they can screen the natural products, or they can they can design a product based on the structure, which we call it as rational drug design. And the next one, once the researchers they identify the lead, then they will optimize it. In this lead optimization process, the identified lead compounds are synthesized and modified to improve potency and reduce side effects. So in the lead optimization, the researchers conduct experimental testing using animal efficacy models and some tools and designing the drug candidates. Like they will send you to the chemical engineering to enable the what is the possible formulation that they can give to the medication, like any tablet, capsule, or a injection, or any patches. So any formulation that can be suitable for that medicinal product will be desi- uh, will be will be designed after this lead optimization phase. So after drug discovery, the drug development process will start. So in the drug development process, the first one is the preclinical trials. In the preclinical trials, the researchers will test this new drug on non-human subjects for efficacy, toxicity, and other pharmacokinetic information. And these trials are conducted by the scientists in vitro and in vivo with unrestricted dosages. And the information that they will learn from these preclinical trials or preclinical development are ADME, the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, and potential benefits and mechanism of action. Dosage and the routes, the best dosage and the best route will be identified, and the possible side effects with that study medication, and effects on the gender, race, or ethnicity groups, interaction with other treatments, and effectiveness compared to the similar drugs. So once the researchers have this information, then they will submit a request to the regulatory authorities to conduct a trials on humans. Once they get approval based on the information, the toxicity and the efficacy information, they will approve the regulatory authorities will approve to conduct the trials on the humans. That is when the clinical trials will start. And in clinical trials, we have multiple phases like phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, which I'll explain in the next slide. And after the clinical trials, the pharmaceutical companies will submit a request to the regulatory authorities to approve that medication. And the regulatory authorities will review benefit and risk profile of that particular medication, and they will see the toxicity result, efficacy, the pH properties and bioavailability of that particular chemical entity or the medication before they approve the medicine. And once they approve, the pharmaceutical companies will market that product in the respective countries, and they will start the post-marketing surveillance of the product safety information. So these post-marketing surveillance include the collection of the clinical trial and clinical data primarily on the drug safety on the marketed medicines used in everyday practices. So this is the brief of drug discovery and development. So which we need to be aware of, like how the pharmacovigilance works in this development, in the drug discovery and development. So coming to the clinical trials, like I said, we have three phases in the clinical trials. The phase 1 include 20 to 100 healthy volunteers who take the drug for about 1 month. And the information that they will learn from the phase 1 are absorption and metabolism, effects on organs and the tissues in humans, and side effects as dosage is increased. So this is the information that the researchers will learn from the phase 1. And coming to the phase 2, in phase 2, the several hundreds of health impaired patients will receive the study medication. So in phase 2 trials, the patients are divided into two categories of treatment group and control group. Whereas in treatment group, the patients will receive the study medication, and in control group, the patients may receive comparator drug or a placebo. Comparator drug is a pharmaceutical product which is already available in the market for that particular disease. Placebo is a dummy medication where there is no active ingredient in that formulation. And the information that the researchers will learn from this phase 2 are effectiveness in treating the disease, how effective in the treatment group by comparing to the placebo and the control group, and the short-term side effects in health impaired patients. Since these phase 2 trials are conducted for months, the researchers can identify the possible short-term side effects after receiving the medication. And the dose range, like what is the minimum dose that the patient can the patient has to take to have that effect on that particular disease, and the maximum dose that the patient can take on a daily basis. So this dose range information is learned from this phase 2 trial. After phase 2, there are phase 3 trials where the hundreds or thousands of health impaired patients receive the study medication. And these phase 3 trials also for the months, maybe for few years, where in phase 3 also patients are divided into treatment group and the control group, where treatment group will receive the study medication, control group will receive comparator drug or a placebo. And the information that they will learn from the phase 3 are benefit and risk relationship of the drug, and the less common and longer term side effects, and the labeling information like the warnings, precautions, contraindications or any interactions or the overdose information. So whatever the pharmaceutical companies wants to update in the labeling document, that information they will learn majorly from the phase 3 trials, because there are thousands of the patients are involved in the phase 3. So we can get to know about few very common or the some rare reactions also from the phase 3 trials. So these are the clinical trial phases we have. So now where does this pharmacovigilance is involved in this drug development? So from the clinical trial, the submission of adverse event reports which happened in the clinical trial has to be submitted to the regulatory authorities within a specified time frame. And the companies also have to notify of such events to all the investigators and ethics committee and a safety review by independent drug safety monitoring boards. So the pharmacovigilance is involved here in the submission of the adverse events reports to these authorities and other parties. So through the pharmacovigilance process, from the clinical trials, the investigators will share the information to the pharmacovigilance team, and the pharmacovigilance will handle that information and will assess the case and submit the information to the regulatory authorities if it is required. And also in the clinical trials, we need to prepare and submit the annual reports and evaluate benefit and risk. So this is also a part of pharmacovigilance process where in aggregate reporting part where we will prepare the aggregate annual reports from the clinical trials and evaluate benefit and risk of these medications. So this is where pharmacovigilance is involved in drug development. So majorly for the safety reporting and preparation of the reports to the regulatory authorities, we did the pharmacovigilance process for the drugs in the clinical trials. So now coming to the pharmacovigilance in post-marketed products. As we have already seen, the majority of the benefit and risk profile was already identified through the clinical trial phases, and the regulatory authorities have reviewed them and approved, considering the benefits outweighing the risk. But why this pharmacovigilance is needed after clinical trials? Because animal tests are insufficient to predict the human safety and the clinical trials are too small where it typically involve like hundreds to thousands of the volunteers which are enough to spot only the more common side effects. The rarer side effects may emerge only after millions of people have taken the drug. For example, like at least 30,000 of exposures are needed. So not to miss at least one patient with an ADR of incidence of 1 in 10,000. To identify incidence of 1 in 10,000, we need at least 30,000 people to take the medication and to observe that this event happened because of the medication, which we cannot observe from the clinical trial because the number is too small in the clinical trials. And the clinical trials are too short, where the trials may last for just a few months, but some adverse effects develop only after patients take a drug for many years. For example, any drugs which can cause cancer, we can only get to know about that information after the drug is being in the market for few years. And the clinical trial settings are too unrealistic, where we have controlled conditions, we have so many inclusion and exclusion criteria, where the clinical trials do not enroll the patients of at-risk population like children, elderly, or pregnant, or any other one. But once the drug is released into the market, anyone can take the medication with some underlying conditions of some cardiac issues or any diabetic patients can receive the medication or immunodeficiency patients also can receive the medication. But in clinical trials, we do not we consider all these conditions and we will not include those patients in the trials. So the realistic information we can only get it from once the drug is released into the market. So that is the reason we need pharmacovigilance even after the clinical trials. Few examples where the drugs had been in the market for few years and later they are discontinued because of the safety concerns. So the first one is Accutane with the generic of isotretinoin. So this was used for acne and later it was withdrawn from the market because of increase in birth defects, miscarriages and premature births when it is used by the pregnant women. And this drug has been on market for the 27 years. And there is another example of Bextra, valdecoxib, which is an NSAID, like with any COX-2 inhibitor. This drug also has some serious cardiovascular adverse events associated, like myocardial infarction associated with death and the stroke. And this drug was withdrawn from the market after 3.3 years is been on the market. So the longer term side effects on the rare side effects we cannot observe from the clinical trials, and this information we can only get it once the drug is released into the market. And there are different sources to collect the information once the drug is released into the market. So we can discuss that in the later slides, like how we get the information and how we process the reports and how we submit the information to the regulatory authorities. Coming to the terminologies in pharmacovigilance. So some of you might not be aware of the terminologies that we have in pharmacovigilance. As per the ICH and other regulatory authorities, we have specific terminologies for the in the pharmacovigilance which we need to understand to assess the events correctly and to submit the reports correctly to the regulatory authorities. So we will discuss few terminologies which are important for everyone to understand. So the first one is adverse event. So adverse event is any occurrence or worsening of an undesirable or unintended sign or the symptom which can be a abnormal lab data or the disease which is temporarily associated with the use of medicinal product, whether or not related to the medicinal product or the procedure. So adverse event can be anything that happened to the patient after receiving the medication. So it can be an medical condition, or it can be a lack of effect, or it can be a drug abuse, drug misuse, or it can be any abnormal lab data or the some abnormalities found in the ECG or the any radiology findings. So anything can be an adverse event. So this event does not necessarily have to be have caused by the medication. That means the causal relationship is not required to consider the event as adverse event. And the next one is adverse reaction. So adverse reaction or adverse drug reaction or suspected adverse reaction is a response to a medicinal product which is noxious and unintended and which occurs at the doses normally used in man for the prophylaxis, diagnosis or therapy of disease or for the restoration, correction or modification of physiological function. So that means any adverse events that are happened because of the medicinal products, though the patients have taken as per the labeling, as per the information that is provided in the labeling or as per the guidelines provided by the company regarding that product. And that major difference between adverse event and adverse drug reaction is the causality. If any adverse event with the causality associated with the medicine, we consider that event as adverse drug reaction. So, as per the regulatory authority requirement, the adverse drug reactions are needed for the expedited reporting. So, that is why we need to know what are the events to be considered as adverse event and which events to be considered as adverse drug reaction. And the next one is unexpected adverse reaction. So, any adverse drug reaction where nature or severity of which is not consistent with the domestic labeling or the marketing authorization labeling or expected from the characteristics of the drug. So unexpected adverse drug reaction is any event which is not present in any of the labeling documents of the product and it has with the nature and severity. So nature and severity of the adverse reaction has to match with the information that is provided in the labeling documents. And the next one is adverse event following immunization. So it is any adverse event that happened after an immunization or a vaccine, which is considered to be believed to be caused by the immunization. That events we call it as AEFA or adverse event following immunization. Poor quality problems or product quality problems can be a bioequivalent problems or expired products using or the poor storage or inadequate packaging information regarding the product. So if there is any product quality issues, that also we need to report it to the regulatory authorities. And the counterfeit products. Counterfeit products are illegal copies of branded products and may contain little or none of the labeled active ingredients. And the next one is serious adverse event. So the serious adverse event is any untoward medical occurrence or effect that at any dose result in death, life-threatening, requiring hospitalization, or resulting in persistent or significant disability or incapacity, congenital anomaly or birth defect, or any event which may result in other serious criteria if they are not may be considered as serious adverse reaction When based upon medical judgment, we may jeopardize the patient or subject and may require medical or surgical intervention to prevent one of the outcomes listed in this definition. So, as per the regulatory authority requirements, the expected for the ICSR reports, the seriousness of the event plays a major role for the reporting to the regulatory authority. So that is the reason we need to consider the we need to assess the seriousness correctly for all the events that are reported by the patient or the any reporter. So for that we need to be aware of this definition and the criteria like the death. So death, we have to select this seriousness criteria when it is only reported by the reporter. And life threatening also we have to consider only when it is clearly reported in the report, or maybe if the patient is in coma or any or require any ventilator support, only in that situation we can consider the seriousness as life threatening. Or requiring hospitalization or prolongation of existing hospitalization. To consider this criteria, it has to be reported in the report like the patient has been in hospital for the 24 hours. So the 24-hour stay is mandatory to consider the seriousness as hospitalization. And the next is to consider the seriousness as disability. Then we can see in our report like if there are any events such as blindness or the any product causing blindness or the deafness or the loss of any limbs or any discoloration to the teeth. So these kind of things can be considered as a disability as a seriousness criteria. And next is congenital anomaly or the birth defect. So the simple example is thalidomide-induced phacomelia, where so these are the example where for the baby, if the baby experience any adverse events if from the mother who has taken the medication, and that adverse events fall under this criteria of congenital anomaly or the birth defect. So recently, AMA has updated the guidelines on congenital anomaly or the birth defect, where they have given few terminologies which we have to consider as serious. So all the congenital anomaly or the birth defects conditions may not be serious. So when we consider this criteria, we need to follow the EMA guidelines and we have to update it accordingly. And the last one is where we use medical judgment. So if in our report the seriousness of the event is not mentioned, and if we want to upgrade the case, or if we feel like that event might cause any of the other intervention, if it is not treated immediately, then we can consider that event as serious under medically significant section. So, and we also have EMA guidelines, or the EMA has provided, the European Medicine Agency has provided a list of IME, which we call it as important medical event list. So in that list, the agency has updated all the events that has to be considered as serious. So if the report that we have received from the reporter does not specify the seriousness of the event, then we can just refer to the list that is provided by the regulatory agency, the EMA, IME list. And if the event is present in that list, then we have to consider that event as serious under medically significant section. And like I said, assessing the correct seriousness is really critical in the ICSR processing because it impacts the regulatory reporting. And the next one is SUSAR, the suspected unexpected serious adverse reaction. So these SUSARs are any serious events that are suspected to be caused by a medicinal product, but which are not consistent with the information about the medicinal products. That means these are not present in the labeling documents. And these user reports are the most serious of events and are subject to the expedited reporting procedures. So the SUSARs are of high importance for the regulatory reporting and also to the other parties. So this SUSAR, from the definition we can understand the suspected. That means that event happened because of the medication. And unexpected, that means it is a new event, it is not there in our labeling document. And the serious adverse reaction, the seriousness, it is following any of the serious criteria which we have discussed in the earlier slide. So these are the SUSARs which has more important in the regulatory reporting and in expedited reporting. And the next one is signal. Signal is any information. So as per the COMS, signal is any information that arises from one or multiple sources, including observations and experiments, which suggest a new potentially causal association or a new aspect of known association. That means it can be a new event or already identified safety concern, but there is some change in the frequency or the seriousness or severity of that event, or between an intervention and event or the set of related events, either adverse or beneficial, that is judged to be sufficient likelihood to justify the verificatory action. So, in signals are any new safety concerns identified with the medicinal product. So, those are the ones we call it as signals. And the next one is MEDRA. So, MEDRA is a medical dictionary for the regulatory use. So, which is a clinically validated international medical terminology used by the regulatory authorities and the regulated and it is and the regulated biopharmaceutical industry. So, for all the to code all the medical terminologies in our case processing or maybe in any aggregate reporting or any process in the clinical in the drug discovery and development. So, this MEDRA is used. This terminology is used through the entire regulatory process from the pre-marketing to the post-marketing and for the data entry, retrieval, evaluation and the presentation. So to prepare any aggregate reports or to prepare any summary reports, we need to have the data. So to pull the data, so this MEDRA will be helpful to retrieve the data and to analyze like what is happening with that particular product. And the metarchy has different hierarchy levels. So we have S4C, which is system organ class, and the high level group term, that is HLGT, and high level term, which is HLT, and the preferred term, which is PT, and the low level term, that is LLT. So these are the 5 MEDRA hierarchy levels. So whenever we receive any case, all the medical terminologies in our case are coded with the MEDRA. So the term that we select for the coding is the low level term, which is as reported by the reporter. So for example, if the reporter has reported like the feeling queasy, then the LLT we will select is feeling queasy. And the rest all PT, HLT, HLGT and SOC will be auto populated by the MEDRA. So all these LLT terms are attached to the one preferred term. So that this preferred term represents single medical concept. So for nausea, we can have multiple LLTs like feeling queasy or feeling nauseous or maybe directly nausea. They can report or felt like throwing up. So these are the different types of the terminologies can be reported by the reporter. So all these terminologies are categorized into a single medical concept of nausea. That is what PT is. And the high level term is the HLT, where subordinate to the HLGT and it is superordinate to the grouping for one or more PTs. So the HLT includes single medical concept of or it is related to the or all the PTs are related to this HLT term based on their anatomy, pathology, physiology, etiology or the function. And HLGT is subordinate to the SOC and superordinate to the grouping for one or more HLTs. So these HLGT and HLTs are considered as the grouping terms where they are used to facilitate data retrieval and presentation by providing clinically relevant grouping of the terms. And the next is the SOC, the system organ class. These are the highest level of terminology and represents the anatomical or physiological system, etiology or the purpose. So in the example, if you see, we have this nausea related to the nausea as nausea symptoms, and they're categorized into gastrointestinal as signs and is a part of gastrointestinal. So almost 80,000 plus LLT terms, the lower all categorized into the SOCs of 28. So and there are only 28 SOCs in the MEDRA. All these 80,000 terms are described in these 28 SOCs. Like we have respiratory disorders and we have have nervous system disorder, pregnancy-related disorders, or any infections, infestations, or any the neoplasm disorder. So like this, all the terminologies are categorized into these different associations. And in our case processing, especially in ICSR processing, we use MEDRA to code all the medical conditions like the patient's medical histories and the indication, the product indication, and also the adverse events. And the MEDRA coding is mandatory for the regulatory reporting, and we have to code a reporting. So there are data elements that are required for the ICH. So that if we don't event with the MEDRA, then the reports will not be submitted to the regulatory authorities. And there are so many conventions or the guidances that we have to follow when we are coding the MEDRA, which we will discuss in detail along with the examples in our pharmacovigilance training. And the next one is RSA, that is Reference Safety Information, which defines which reactions are expected for the investigational medicinal product, the IMP, and marketed medicinal products. So these RSA are the documents. So for investigational medicinal products, that means for the clinical trial products, the products which are in the clinical trials, the documents which we refer for the labeling assessment or the expectedness assessment or listedness assessment are IB and the DCSA, that is Investigator Brochure and Developmental Core Safety Information. So these are the documents which we use to assess the unexpectedness assessment of any event for the investigational medicinal products. And the RSA documents for marketed medicinal products are the company core data sheet, that is CDS, and the company core safety information, that is CCSI. And we also have official local label sheets like US packaging insert for US cases, and for European Union SMPC, that is Summary of Medicinal Products for the products which are authorized in European region, and the Japan product packaging insert for the Japan cases. So for the marketed products, we need to refer these documents to perform the expectedness or the labeling assessment of the events. And the COMS has provided different specific guidelines on criteria which we need to follow when we perform this labeling or the expectedness guidelines. So the guidelines we will discuss in detail along with the examples in our course. And the next one is causality assessment. Causality assessment is the assessment of relationship between a treatment drug and the occurrence of an adverse event. That means we are telling whether the event is related to the medicinal product or not. It is also used to evaluate and to check that the particular treatment is the cause of an observed adverse event or not, and also to understand how close is the relationship between the treatment drug and the event. So how do we understand, like how do we provide the relationship is based on the scale for the causality assessment. So in the scale, we have different categories like definite, probable, possible, unlikely, and causality assessment, impossible, and causality ruled out. So when we have a confidence of like more than 95% in causality, like for example, if we have all the possible time relationship between the event and the product, and also there are no other explanation, or the like patient is not taking any other drugs, or patient does not have any other medical conditions, and the response to the withdrawal, like we have the de-challenge and the re-challenge information which suggests like this event happened, the event was discontinued, the patient was able to recover after stopping the medication, and the event reappeared after restarting the medication. And also if we clearly know like this event must be because of pharmacological or phenomenologically using a satisfactory re-challenge, then we will consider that event as definitely related to the medicinal product. And probable, we use this causality when we have a confidence like 50 to 95%, where we have all the information, but the re-challenge information is, if the re-challenge information is not available, but we have other information like the plausible time relationship, and also no other explanations, and there is a response to the withdrawal of the medication. So if we have such information, then we can consider that event as probably related to the medication. And the possible is we use when there is a confidence of 5 to 50% in the causality. It's like where there is an event with reasonable time relationship to the drug intake and could also be explained by the disease or the other drugs. And information on the drug withdrawal, like the D-challenge, and if we don't have D-challenge and re-challenge information, but other information is matching, like this event might be because of the medication, then we use this causality assessment of possible. And the next one is unlikely or the doubtful when there is less than 5% but not 0% confidence in causality. So in situations where the event happened after receiving the medication and if we don't know any other information, then we will consider it as unlikely or the doubtful. And the next is causality assessment impossible. So when we have any insufficient case data, like we don't know, we don't have any information. There are no timelines also not provided, like when the patient has taken medication and when event happened. That information also we don't know. In such situation, we cannot assess the causality. In that time, we will use this causality as not impossible. Assessment was impossible. And the next one is causality ruled out. So after we review the case, like if we feel like the symptoms were there to the patient even before taking the medication, or maybe there are some other explanations like because of patient's underlying medical condition or the concomitant medication, if the event happened, in such situation, we use this causality as causality ruled out. So these are the different scales for the causality assessment, and when we are conducting the causality, we need to follow certain principles, and there are also multiple guidelines from the COMS and the EMA where we need to follow when we are doing the causality. So the basic principles are the dates of the drug, like when the drug was used and when the events happened, and the presence of the symptoms before taking the medication, and the dates of onset date, and the nature of the event, and also the de-challenge and the re-challenge information, and the background or any other patient's underlying medical conditions, the pharmacology of the medicine, and prior knowledge of similar reports with the suspect drug. Like if we have any literature reports on stating like with this class of medication, these events might happen. That information also we need to consider for the causality assessment. So those are the basic principal criteria which we use for the causality assessment, and this is about the causality assessment in ICSR reports especially. So these are the common terminologies that we use on a regular basis, which all the associate must be aware of, along with the definitions and how to apply the principles in the process. And coming to the main topic of pharmacovigilance, which is overview of pharmacovigilance. So in this topic, we will get to know what is this pharmacovigilance process and what are the different phases in the process and what are the steps in each of the phases. So as per the definition, if you can remember, the first we will collect or detect the adverse drug reaction. So that is the phase 1, where at first information about adverse events are collected from the different sources. And the sources can be spontaneous or voluntary reports, or the clinical trials and post-marketing studies, or from the regulatory authorities we can get, or maybe from the licensing partners, from the literatures, and also from the legal reports. So these are the different sources where we will get the information, which again I'll explain in detail in the next slides. And in phase 2 is the assessment of the adverse drug reaction or the adverse event. So once these adverse events are collected, the drug safety team will assess the information in the multiple steps, like the case validity assessment, database entry, event selection and coding with the MEDRA, product coding, seriousness assessment, causality assessment, labeling assessment, writing narrative, and providing medical input. So these are the steps that are there in the phase 2, and that is how the cases the reports are assessed. And the next phase is like once the information is assessed, then the teams that they will understand why these events have happened and take the necessary steps to prevent the further. So the teams that are involved in this phase are the periodic report compilation or the aggregate reports, signal management, and the risk and benefit assessment. So these are the teams that are involved to understand and who will take care of the prevention of the risk that is involved with the medication. And the next one is potential regulatory action. So based on the information that we have provided to the regulatory authorities about the benefit and risk profile of our medication, the regulators will take some actions on the medication. So that actions are the last process in the pharmacovigilance. So that we will discuss in detail in the next slide. So what are these actions, or what are the few examples of the actions that the regulatory authorities can take because of the safety concerns arising from the medication. So this is the overview of pharmacovigilance with the multiple phases and the different steps involved. So coming to the different teams and how actually the process works. So once any adverse event experienced by the patient, then they can share the information through the spontaneous reports. So the spontaneous reports, or we also call it as voluntary reports, these are an unsolicited communication by the healthcare professionals or the consumers to the company or the regulatory authority or to the other organizations which describe one or more adverse drug reactions in a patient who was given one or more medicinal products, and that does not derive from study or any other organized data collection scheme. That means these spontaneous reports. So if I experience any event, then I can directly report it to the company, whoever is manufacturing that product. So there is no involvement of the company, or the company is not asking me about the data about the adverse event, but I am voluntarily reporting it. Or maybe if I inform my physician, then the physician can also directly report it to the company or regulatory authority or to the other organization about the adverse event experience. So this is one of the source which we have discussed. And next one is clinical trial reports. So the clinical trial reports are any reports or the any adverse event information that are experienced by the participants in the clinical trial. And it is an investigator responsibility to share all the serious adverse events that have happened in the clinical trial to the pharmacovigilance or the sponsor. So the sponsor will or the pharmaceutical company will share that information to the pharmacovigilance team, where we will collect it and we will process for the further submissions or the further preparation of the reports. And the other source is literature reports. So the literature report is any adverse drug reaction that is reported in published abstracts or articles in medical or scientific journals, or maybe unpublished manuscripts involving case reports, or any important safety findings or clinical studies, including posters, letters to the editors, and associated communication from the scientific meetings. So in the literatures are we select the reports only from the medical journals about any adverse drug experience. And these literatures are a significant source of information for the monitoring of the safety profile of the medicine, and also risk benefit balance of the medicinal products, and particularly in relation to the detection of new safety signals or emerging safety issues. So the literatures are the major source for the safety concerns or the safety profile of the medication. And the other source are the post-marketing study reports. So once the drugs are released into the market, so the companies will conduct the phase, we also call it as phase 4 trials, where the studies are related to the authorized medicinal product, which are conducted with the aim of identifying, characterizing, or quantifying a safety hazard, confirming the safety profile of the medicinal product, or measuring the effectiveness of risk management measures. So that is why we conduct the post-marketing trials, and we also get the safety information from these post-marketing studies, which we handle them as post-marketing study reports. And the next one is licensing partner reports. A pharma company can get into a licensing agreement with a third party to produce or to market a drug formulation that the other company has developed. And each licensing partner, they will have pharmacovigilance agreement to meet the safety requirements in the marketing country. And the cases that are received from other pharma company which has PVA agreement or the pharmacovigilance agreement need to be handled as licensing partner reports. So, for example, if the company A has a product marketing in US and the company B is marketing the same product in rest of the world, so now the company A and company B will have the pharmacovigilance agreement, and if any information or any safety information or any adverse event report that is received in US, then the company A has to share the information to the company B. So the reports that we are receiving from the other party as per the pharmacovigilance agreements are called the licensing partner reports. And the next one are the regulatory authority reports. So regulatory authority reports are like the reports where where if the consumer or the physician directly send the information to the regulatory authority but not to the company, then what does that regulatory authority do is they will share the information back to the company, because as per the reporting requirements, the reports on the suspected adverse drug reactions or any other serious events must be submitted to all the regulatory authorities where that product is being marketed. If the consumer is reporting about some adverse event, they will report only to a particular country but not to the all the countries where that product is being marketed. That is the reason regulatory authorities will share the information back to the pharmacovigilance team in the pharmaceutical companies, so that that information can reach to the all the regulatory authorities. So these type of reports where we are getting information from the regulatory from other regulatory authorities, we call it as regulatory authority reports. So now we have different sources of information. So what is the first step that we have? So that we have a case intake team. So the pharmaceutical companies have their own specific case intake team in each country where they are marketing the medicines, and they will collect the information from the different sources. And if they receive information in the non-English format, then they will translate it, and they will send the information to the triage team. So this is where our ICSR processing starts. So the triage team will check the case for the initial validity assessment, and they will check whether the case is a new or already received, or they'll create the case and prioritize it. And they will send the case for the case processing. So in the case processing, again, we will do the final check on the case validity as a case processor. So in the case validity assessment, we need to follow multiple guidelines. Like there are 4 validity criteria which we have to follow. If the case meets all these 4 validity criteria, then only that report will be submitted to the regulatory authority. So the 4 validity criteria are the identifiable patient, identifiable reporter, the suspect medication, and a valid adverse drug reaction or a fatal outcome. So the report that we are receiving from from the sources must have a identifiable patient on the report, and it must have a product which is manufactured by the company, and also event. It has to be a valid event, and we should have some information on that particular event. Then only we will consider that case for the validity. And the invalid cases or any cases which is missing any of these 4 criteria will not be submitted to the regulatory authorities. And the next one is database entry. So once we confirm like this case is valid, then we will enter the information in our software or the database. It can be Argus or ArisG or anything that the company is using. Once we will enter all the required fields. So as per the ICH guidelines on the data elements, we need to fill the information in the data in certain data fields for the report submission requirement. Because currently all the regulatory authorities are accepting only electronic format of the reports. It is mandatory for all the companies to follow or to enter all the data elements that are required for the submission to the regulatory authorities. So the information, whatever it is there, we will fill into our database. And the next, we will select the events, like which events has to be selected, and we will code all these events with the MedDRA. So in the event selection and the coding, we need to follow certain guidelines, like which event has to be considered as symptoms and which events has to be considered as diagnosis, or whether the coding of laboratory test is required or not. So there are few criteria which we need to follow when we are selecting the event. So the guidelines which we will provide in our PV course along with the examples. And the next is product coding. So whatever the products that the patient is taking, so it can be suspect medication or the concomitant medication, all these products must be coded using the drug dictionary. So the most common drug dictionary that is used by all the companies to code the concomitant medications are the WHO drug dictionary. And to code the suspect medications, they use the company specific drug dictionary. And the next is seriousness assessment. So, like we have discussed in the terminology part about the seriousness, if any event that meets the seriousness criteria of death, life-threatening hospitalization, disability, congenital anomaly, or any other medically significant condition, then we have to consider that case as serious. And like I said, the seriousness assessment, causality, and labeling, these three are the major. They take major role in the ICSR submission or the expected reporting to the regulatory authorities. And the causality assessment, so like I said in the terminology part, the causality will be assessed for the events. We will consider the reporter causality, and also the company also will assess the causality again, whether the event is related to the medication or not. And the next one is labeling assessment. So in the labeling assessment, we will do the labeling based on the RSI documents. And when we are doing this labeling assessment, we have to follow so many guidelines, like which event has to be considered as labeled or unlabeled. Like in for example, in diagnosis and symptom scenario, how do we consider? Or if there is a change in nature frequency, then how do we consider that scenario? And how do we apply or how do we assess that labeling in such scenarios? And also for the conditions like any lack of efficacy or any product related problems, which labeling we have to consider. So there are specific guidelines involved for these conditions, which we will explain in detail along with the examples in our pharmacovigilance course. And the next and important part in case processing is writing narrative. So the narrative writing is it is an important part in the pharmacovigilance process, where we provide a summary of information to the patient what happened at that particular time. So this summary will be submitted to the regulatory authority. So we have a standards set by the ICH, the International Conference on Harmonization, on how to write these narratives, which again I'll explain in the later slides about writing narratives and what are the points we need to consider to write the narrative. So once the case is processed, the case has to be sent for the inline quality review check. As per the regulatory authority requirements, all the cases or all the expedited reporting cases which are going to be submitted to the regulatory authorities must be quality reviewed internally before they submit the report to the authorities. And also the internal quality review team, they will check appropriateness of the case, like whether we have coded all the events or not, whether we have selected all the medical conditions, whether we have entered all the required data elements from the source, or they will check our assessment on the seriousness causality labeling, and they will perform 100% QC of the case. Once the quality review is done, the medical assessment will take place, where the medical reviewer team, so which is a the medical review team majorly include the physicians, so who will review labeling, causality, seriousness, and coding of the events, and they will request follow-up for any missing information. So this is what the medical reviewers do, and if there is any information that is missing, then they will request the follow-up to the reporter, and the report will be submitted to the regulatory authority. So this is the entire ICSR processing with the different steps involved. So now the ICSR processing is done. So the next one is aggregate data review. So if we understand, the ICSR talks about a single patient. So we can only report one, we can only, in ICSR report, we can only include a single patient information. So what are these aggregate reports? Aggregate reports are cumulative review of safety information from a wide range of sources on a periodic basis and submits that findings to the regulators worldwide. So that means the aggregate data includes a cumulative summary of a product. So for a single product, what happened to that single product in the time frame, like either 6 months or in the last 1 year or in the 3 years, what happened to that product. That is what we include in the aggregate reports. So, in addition to the submission of the ICSR reports, the companies are obliged to report the cumulative safety exposure data in periodic intervals to the respective health authorities within the specific timelines, which in turn depends on age of the medicinal product in the market and type of the aggregate report. So the timelines for aggregate reports vary depending on the product, marketing status, and also the type of the report. And this continued monitoring on aggregate safety data facilitates regulators and the MAHs, the companies, to maintain positive benefit and risk balance and implement the early risk minimization plans for safety concerns reported. So that is why aggregate reporting is required for the early identification of risk minimization plans involved with the safety concerns that are identified through the ICSR process and also from the signal process. So the types of aggregate reports are, we have two types of aggregate reports. We have pre-marketing reports and the post-marketing reports. So in the pre-marketing reports, we have IND annual reports which are required for the FDA. So what are the products, any product which is which has approved under IND, the investigational new drug application, then all the companies has to submit an annual reports on all this IND. And the CSR reports, the clinical study reports, are the summary of the clinical trials, what happened to that particular study medication and how many trials are done. So all the safety information also we include in the clinical study reports. And the next and important one is the developmental safety update report, or the DSUR, and these are the annual reports. So the DSUR is the most common annual report that is required by most of the regulatory agencies, and it is also a requirement from the ICH. So the International Conference on Harmonization has provided a detailed guidelines on what is this DSUR is all about and what is the structure of the DSUR. And in the post-marketing reports, we have a periodic benefit risk evaluation report, that is PBRE, or we also call it as periodic safety update report, that is PSUR. So the PSUR is the most common report that is used by most of the regulatory agencies for the products which are in the post-marketing phase. And the PADR, that is periodic adverse drug experience report. So this report is required by the US FDA. And NDA and annual reports are also required for the US FDA. So these are the few aggregate reports which are required to be submitted to the regulatory authority. So the formats, the structures, and how to prepare these reports. So these all things we will explain in detail in our course. So the formats are different for each of these reports, and how to write and how to prepare the summaries. So these all exercises are also included in our course. And the next one is signal management. So as we have seen in the definition of the signal, so it can be any new safety concern or any change in already identified new safety issue is considered as a signal. So in signal management process, it is a set of activities which include signal detection, signal validation, signal prioritization, signal assessment, recommendation for action, and exchange of information. And it is completed to identify like any new risk associated with the drug or whether no risk have changed. So that is how the signal management process will be completed. So in coming to the signal detection, so signal detection in pharmacovigilance involves looking at the adverse reaction data for the patterns that suggest new safety information. So the different sources that we have discussed in the earlier slide, that from the different sources, once we get to know about the adverse drug reaction, and after we do this our ICSR assessment, where we give our labeling assessment, seriousness and causality assessment, where we provide our initial input on whether the drug is associated to the medicine, whether the event is associated to the medicine or not, and also whether the event are new or already existing events. So once we provide that information, that signal detection team will look at the adverse reaction data for the patterns which suggest if there is any new safety information is identified, then that will be taken care by the signal detection team. And the next is signal validation. So once often from the signal detection processes, it will generate a considerable number of signals which must be managed. So then once as a result, the prioritization of the data is required, since not all the signals can be evaluated or validated simultaneously due to the resource limitations. So in order to identify the signals which need immediate attention, an impact analysis can be carried out, so which explores the strength of evidence, medical significance, and potential impact on the public health. So that is how we will we will prioritize the signals. And the next is the signal validation and the evaluation. So the basic goal of signal evaluation or validation is to determine whether sufficient evidence is there to identify causal relationship between the adverse event or the drug pair which is identified in the detected signal. So in the signal evaluation and validation, we will find the route for the causality assessment. And in the signal, for any signal analysis, the validated or verified signals are assessed to determine their impact on the benefit and risk profile and the public health. So that is what the signal assessment team does. And this assessment step identify appropriate activities for all the signals, especially validated or the verified signals, and the recommended action will be, they will provide the recommendation of the action. So I'll explain you in the next slide what are the possible recommendations that the companies can provide to prevent that safety concerns. And the last one is exchange of information. So exchange of information means how the companies are sharing this safety concern to the regulatory authorities or to the healthcare professionals or to the consumers. So that information is included in the exchange of information. So this is the overview of signal management process. And the next step involved is the benefit and risk analysis and mitigation. So, which we also call it as risk minimization or the risk management plans or the risk minimization activities. The main objective of this is to document the risk management system considered necessary to identify, characterize, and minimize the medicinal products' important risks. The important risks are identified from the clinical trials or maybe from the animal studies. And the three major decisions of this document include these documents majorly contains the safety specifications, like what are the important identified risks or what are the potential risks that are identified, and the pharmacovigilance plan. So it provides planning of all the pharmacovigilance activities to characterize and quantify the clinically relevant risk and to identify new adverse reactions. So how they are planning this pharmacovigilance for their products. And the risk minimization plans, like it includes the planning and implementation of risk minimization measures, including evaluation of the effectiveness of this risk minimization measure activities. So these are the major components of the document. So the majorly and this medicine safety plans or benefit and risk analysis and mitigation plans are required as per ICH guidelines and EMA guidelines and also as per the FDA guidelines. So the major documents or the major documents that are currently in use are the US risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. So this document majorly focus on the benefit and risk ratio of the medication. So whether there is, because of the safety concern, whether there is a change in benefit and risk profile of the medication or not. So that is what it majorly concerns. And even the risk management plan is required for the EMA and also for the rest of the countries. And they need to include all the information on the safety specifications and the PV plans and the risk minimization plans. So this is about the benefit and risk analysis and mitigation, and this is the entire overview of pharmacovigilance, where once we receive the report, we will create the cases in our database, we will process it as through the ICSR processing, and we will submit the case with the initial assessment. And once the reports are submitted to the regulatory authorities, depending on the periodic review, the aggregate reports will be prepared depending on the type of the report required. And also signal management team will take care of the signals. If there are any new safety issues identified, then that process also will happen simultaneously when we do the ICSR processing. And for any safety concerns identified through the aggregate data or through the signal management will include in the benefit and risk analysis and mitigation. So in this document, we include all the safety concerns and the prevention activities that we have taken for those safety issues. And the actions that we take to mitigate the risk. So these are the possible regulatory actions as well. So the first one is alteration of product labeling. So we can update the product label, like we can include in the warning section or the precaution section, the contraindication or the any drug food interaction, or maybe the adverse event section of the document. We can update the information about the new safety concerns, like and also we can do other changes to the conditions of registration, like the role of RMP. See in the RMP document where we provide the pharmacovigilance plan for all the new safety concerns identified. So the regulatory agency might require to prepare a new RMP plan for the new safety concern that is identified in the process, or maybe that product can be removed from the market because of the safety concerns. And the communication of important safety and benefit and risk information to the sponsor and the DHCP letter. So these DHCP letters are direct healthcare provider letters where the companies will share the information directly to the physicians, whoever is prescribing that medication to the patients, about the risk involved with the medication and how to prevent that risk information also they will provide it to the healthcare professionals in these letters. Or the regulatory authorities can release web statements on like the potential risk involved with the medications, and also medicine safety update articles. So maybe that information also can be updated in the articles, like in WHO release in every quarterly they release all the safety updates where it provides the what are the safety concern that is happened throughout the world. So they prepare this newsletter every quarterly, and the regulatory authorities very frequently they release the web statements on the risk involved with this. I mean, what are the safety concerns that are happened with the medications? They do release the web statements very frequently. So these are the possible actions that the companies can take to mitigate the risk involved with the safety concerns. So this is the entire overview of pharmacovigilance in brief. So in our pharmacovigilance course, we will explain in detail about the different guidelines that we have to follow this process, and also with along with the case studies and examples. And we also provide you the access to the training database where we include the dummy cases or the dummy scenarios for you to work on, or for you to have on practical experience on handling the reports. So coming to the narrative, so like I said in the ICSR, the narrative is very has important role in the pharmacovigilance process. So as per the International Conference on Harmonization Guidelines E3, a patient a patient narrative should include the nature, intensity, and outcome of the event. So we need to include everything about the event, like what is the nature and how does these events were discovered, the signs and the symptoms, and then how they have diagnosed it, the conditions, and what is the diagnosis. So everything we have to include, and whether the patient is recovered from the event or not, that information also we need to include. And the clinical course leading to the event, along with the laboratory findings and any pathology tests that the patient was taken. And the next is timing of study drug administration. Those timing, like when the study drug was administered, the details of the study drug, or maybe the marketed medicinal products. If it is marketed drug, then we need to include details like when the patient have taken the medication, and for which indication, the route of administration, the batch number, lot numbers, expiration date. So all this information are required. The relevant laboratory measures and the countermeasures, like the treatments that are taken by the patient because of adverse reaction, whether any treatment with the medication or any surgeries are required, or any other medical information, interventions, or any dietary changes. So all anything that patient has taken to recover from that adverse event, we have to include that information. And action taken with the study drug in relation to the event, whether the patient was discontinued using the medication or there is no change, or whether the patient increased the dose or decreased the dose, or any like temporarily discontinued or permanently discontinued the medication. So that information we have to include. And the next is post-mortem findings if applicable. So if the patient died because of the adverse event, then that information, the autopsy, if autopsy results are available, then we need to include that in the narrative for the cause of death and other relevant information. And an important one is on the investigators and the sponsors' opinion on causalities, like whether how we are considering the causality as related or not related. And if you're considering as related, and we have to provide a justification for both related and for not related assessment. And along with that, we need to include the patient IDs, age, gender, the other clinical conditions, and the diseases that are being treated, and any other relevant medical histories, and the concomitant or any other prior medications that has to be included. So that also we have to include in the narrative. So if we see the sample narrative, so we will start any case narrative with the starting statement or like from whom we have received and what is the source of report. So in this example, you can see like it is a spontaneous source and is received by a physician, by a sales representative, or maybe via from company, and the date like when we have received the report. So this date we have to update this date correctly when we have all the 4 validity criteria, because this date triggers the expedited reporting. And then the next includes the patient information, like who is the patient, the age, gender, ethnicity, and other information like height and weight, and what happened to the patient. So the introduction about the patient we need to give. And the next one is patient medical history and and any other current conditions or any other concomitant medications we have to include in the next section. And the next is all about the drug that is considered to be suspected for the adverse event. So what is the drug and the route, frequency, dose, and the indications and the date when they have started receiving the medication. And the next one is all about the adverse event. So what is the adverse event and what are the like how they have evaluated along with the laboratory findings or any other pathology findings that are available, and also action taken and the outcome of the event. And we will close the narrative with the seriousness and causality statement, where we provide the seriousness of the event and the causality of the event. So this is the sample narrative, and majorly this is the flow which we follow for all the report types. And the next is on the regulatory submission timelines, or we call it as expedited reporting timelines. So coming to the regulatory submission timelines, we also call it as expedited reporting timeline. So we have different regulatory authorities which requires the cases to be submitted in different time frames. But globally, these timelines are categorized into these timelines, like for the expedited reporting, especially for the clinical trial reports with the seriousness of death and life threatening, and the SUSAR reports must be submitted as soon as possible, but no longer than the 7 calendar days. So for the SUSAR and the death and life threatening cases of clinical trials must be submitted within 7 calendar days. And for the clinical trials with other serious and suspected cases must be submitted within 15 calendar days. So for the SUSAR and death and life-threatening, follow-up has to be submitted in the next 8 calendar days. And for other cases, the follow-up can be submitted whenever the information is available. And for other reports like spontaneous, literature, post-marketing, licensing partner, and the regulatory authority, all the serious cases must be submitted within 15 calendar days. And the non-serious reporting is completely based on country-specific conventions. For example, for EU region, the non-serious cases must be submitted within 90 calendar days. And for the few countries like the Saudi Arabian FDA needs all the non-serious cases to be submitted within 15 calendar days. So the timelines for the post-marketing reports may vary depending on the regulations from the different countries and based on the product as well. For a few products, companies wants to report the information as soon as possible. So the timelines may vary, but these are the global standard timelines which we follow for the for the reporting of ICSRs. So these are the ICSR reporting timelines we have. And coming to the aggregate reporting timeline. So we have different types of aggregate reports, like we have DSUR, PEDAS, PSUR. So the PSUR or PBRER has to be submitted immediately upon the request. So whenever the company as is requesting for an approval or the marketing in that particular country, then they have to submit this PSUR report first. And every 6 months from authorization until the product was placed on the market, and every 6 months for the first 2 years on the market, and annually for the next 2 years, and thereafter every 3 years this PSUR reports has to be submitted to the regulatory authorities. And for the DSUR reports are for the clinical trial reports, which has to be submitted annually from the DIBD, that is Developmental International Birth Date. That is the date when the drug was approved to conduct the trials in the humans. So that is the clinical trial start date. So DIBD is common, or it is a standard for all the developmental products. And for PEDA, which is required by the US FDA, the quarterly reports has to be submitted for the first 3 years and annual reports thereafter. So this is a requirement by the US FDA. And these are the aggregate reporting timelines which we need to memorize. And for the PSURs, the EMA maintains a list of the products by when they have to submit. So the companies will follow that list and they will submit the reports accordingly. And the last topic in our session is about the pharmacovigilance audits and inspections. So as per the regulatory authority requirement, all the companies will have internal audit team or the internal quality assurance team, which is a part of the pharmacovigilance, who conduct the reviews or who maintain all these SOPs, and they will review whether we are following the guidelines that are provided by the regulatory agencies or not. So the first one is pharmacovigilance inspections. So these inspections are done by the regulatory authorities. So it can be FDA or MHRA or maybe the EMA or any other regulatory agency can conduct an inspection to the marketing authorization holders to determine whether the company is complying with the pharmacovigilance obligations, and to facilitate compliance and the pharmacovigilance inspections of MAH or any firms providing the pharmacovigilance services to MAHs are performed. So majorly in inspections, they will review whether we are following all the pharmacovigilance obligations. Like they will determine whether the company has personnel, system and facilities in order to meet their PV obligations. Like we have the trained, like I said, the qualified person only can access the cases. So they will check for the quality, like qualification along with the training documents, whether we have proper training documents in place and the system in place, like the quality management system is required and the training system is required, and the process to handle the volume, whether we have sufficient people or no. So they will check that information as well. And they will identify, record and address non-compliance which may pose a risk to the public health. So if we are not reporting any adverse event that are known to the company, and they will check that information whether we are reporting all the adverse event that we have received or not. And to use the inspection result as a basis for enforcement actions where considered necessary. Like if the company is non-compliant, then the regulatory authority may give warnings to the companies, or they may take action on certain products as well. This is about pharmacovigilance inspections. And coming to the pharmacovigilance audits. So the PV audit activities verified by evaluation of objective evidence the appropriateness and effectiveness of the implementation and operation of a PV system, including its quality system for the PV activities. So, like I said, the internal quality assurance team or maybe the outsourced quality assurance team will review the process whether we are following all the SOPs or not. If we are not following, then they will give the report on the things that we are not doing it correctly, along with the evidence. And the major aim of these pharmacovigilance audits are to conduct a systematic, independent, disciplined, and documented process to obtain evidence of a functioning PV system and to evaluate the evidence objectively and determine whether the system meets its goals, and then to contribute to improving risk management, control, and the government processes. So like I said, they will review all the processes, and if you are not following it, they will provide the inputs, or they can provide you the findings from the audits, and which we have to give our root cause analysis, like why we are not following it, and we have to provide the corrective action and preventive action, and we have to follow up on that, like whether we are following the processes or not. So this is how the entire pharmacovigilance audit process works. And these pharmacovigilance audits are done by the in-house QA person, or maybe few companies are outsourcing this audit part. So the outsourced audit team also can conduct the pharmacovigilance audits. So this is about pharmacovigilance inspections and audits. So with this, we have covered all the topics necessary for you to understand on the pharmacovigilance basic concepts. Thank you for your attention. So for any other queries or any information that you need regarding our pharmacovigilance course, you can contact the numbers that are displayed on the screen, or you can visit our website to see our course curriculum and to enroll into the course.